You're listening to Soundside. I'm Scott Greenstone. Seattle schools have been struggling with huge questions about the future and essentially no permanent leader at the helm. That's about to change. After a months long search, the Seattle Public Schools District finally has a new superintendent. Yesterday, the Seattle School Board voted to name Ben Shuldiner as the lone finalist for the role. Shuldiner is currently the superintendent of the Lansing School District in Michigan. He'll be the fourth superintendent in the last decade at Seattle Public Schools. Back in March, former superintendent Brent Jones announced he was planning to step down from the position and would have left in September. But instead, he went on medical leave in May, and since then, the role has been filled by an interim superintendent. So, this appointment of Shuldiner comes during a period of turmoil for the district, which has been facing a budget shortfall and grappling with issues around school safety. Sami West is a reporter at KUOW who has been covering the ongoing search for a new superintendent. She interviewed Shuldiner yesterday and joins us now to share her takeaways from that conversation. Sami, thank you for being here.
Hey, Scott. It's so good to be here.
So before we talk about Shuldiner, I want to note that this race for superintendent felt very top secret. You reported that Shuldiner was previously just referred to as Candidate 7. And we heard that you weren't even given his name until an hour before you interviewed him. Is that true?
It's true. Probably one of the wildest work days of my life, like preparing for an interview with a person I did not even know the name of. Like, can you say you've done that before, Scott? I don't know.
No, absolutely not. Why do you think this decision process has been kept so under wraps?
I think there was concern that if you like tell too many people the name ahead of time, like journalists included, the secret was bound to get out. But the reason all of this has been confidential is kind of by design. The school board decided to have what was called a closed superintendent search. So typically in other superintendent searches I've covered, we see the names of candidates pretty early. Like SPS got over 40 applicants for this job, this superintendent job. And it wouldn't have been unusual for us to see even that full list. Like, even if you don't make it to the next round of interviews, sometimes school districts will put that out. But the reason the board decided to do it this way in Seattle, they were hoping they'd attract a better pool of candidates, including sitting superintendents. And I think that was important in this scenario because the district was doing this search at kind of a weird time. Usually, boards are starting the search process a lot earlier in the year. But because former Superintendent Brent Jones gave his notice in March, that kind of threw the usual timeline off. Like usually a superintendent is named in, like March or maybe in the months immediately following that. And then they start on like July 1st. So if you're potentially asking a candidate to leave whatever school district they're currently in at like a mid-year point, I think understandably some people would just be like, I am not applying for that job. So the school board was looking to kind of avoid that scenario.
Okay, so tell us about this person that you now know who he is and you have met him and learned something about him. What do we know about Shuldiner?
Yeah, he's been an educator for 25 years. He's been a classroom teacher. He taught English and history, founded a high school called the High School for Public Service in Brooklyn, New York, and was principal there for a decade. He's also been an education professor, so essentially training people to become teachers, principals, superintendents. He was a consultant and worked with schools and education leaders in Norway and India. He also ran for Congress in New York at one point as a Democrat. And as you mentioned earlier, since 2021, he's been the superintendent of the Lansing School District in central Michigan.
So, and why do you think you mentioned that there were more than 40 applicants? Why do you think that he landed this position or, rose to the top?
Yeah, so last week, before we even knew who Schuldner was, he was referred to as candidate 7. It was between him and candidate 8. And the board liked both of the candidates a lot. Apparently, both of them kind of fit the bill of what the public said it wanted at community engagement sessions and surveys over the spring and summer. People wanted an innovative, experienced leader who was driven by equity and focused on students. And both of those candidates fit that bill, apparently. But the board also all agreed, shocking, I know, that they all agreed on something, that he was your guy. And that's because of his financial expertise. In Lansing, Shuldiner filled a $20 million budget gap, which sounds like small potatoes compared to SPS.
Yeah.
Recent deficits at the district have been like $100 million or more. But since the district is smaller and has a smaller budget, it's actually pretty comparable to SPS's situation. So he did that. Schuldner also says the district now has $40 million in reserves. So that's a pretty big deal. So it's become fiscally solvent. So board members really liked that he had that direct experience. They also talked about that they just kind of liked the vibe that he had. They called him blunt. And now that I've talked to him, I kind of see what they mean. He's just a very clear communicator and kind of just tells it like it is, I guess. So I think that's refreshing for Seattle Public Schools. And I think that's just kind of what put him over the edge, I guess.
Interesting. Now that makes me want to hear from him. It sounds like he's really optimistic about the new opportunity despite the challenges. Let's listen.
It's very Goldilocksy for me. This is the perfect fit. I really feel like, the size, the culture, the urbanism, as well as the urbanism, this is a great place to be. And I'm just thrilled.
It's okay. So Goldilocksy a little bit, but it is not going to be just a walk in the forest, right? Running such a big school district. So why did he talk to you about why he wants this role? It is going to be a big challenge. I have to think to myself, like, why would anyone want this job?
Right. I mean, fair. I think what really he said was that he's energized by the prospect of this really big job. He's excited about it. He thinks it's kind of the perfect next step in kind of the trajectory of his career. He's been in Lansing for almost 5 years, and I got the sense that he wasn't necessarily itching to leave. The Seattle School Board's search firm actually reached out to him about this job, but he's also been up for a couple of other superintendent jobs around the country in the last year. So I don't think he's itching to leave per se, but I also think he feels like he's accomplished a lot there and he's kind of just ready to move on whenever the right opportunity comes up. And he also says he loves Seattle. His cousin apparently lives in Bothell and he's got a lot of friends in Seattle. He loves the outdoors. His words, he and his wife are both pasty and excited about the overcast weather. So that was really funny to hear.
Vampire land, yeah.
And yeah, he seemed excited about the city, like we heard before, the size of the district. He worked and lived in New York before taking the Lansing job, so I think this is kind of just a sweet spot. It's Goldilocksy.
Mhm. I think even though he's Goldilocksy by his own admission, he did acknowledge, right, to you that there are some real big issues facing the district.
If you're a superintendent and you're being asked to think about a district, you want to go into a place that actually believes in public education, where you're not fighting every day to try to prove that it's a good thing. I think Seattle truly in its heart believes it. And I think that there's just systems and the people are great. The systems and structures are problematic.
I think that I mean, you can look at, voters passing the education levy this, Tuesday. You can see that people want to fund education here, but he may be right about that systems and structures issue. This is the Seattle Public Schools' fourth superintendent search since 2014. Why has this role faced so much turnover in the past decade, do you think, Sami?
I mean, being a superintendent anywhere is a tough job. You're leading a really large system, and I mean, it's schools. Like, can you think of something that people are more passionate about than like their kids going to school, getting a good education? So I think it's just tough anywhere. This is a national issue. Superintendents frequently are leaving their jobs, especially after the pandemic. But I would also say, Seattle has kind of been in a uniquely tough spot recently. There's all the financial issues, $100 million or so budget gaps every year I've covered Seattle Public Schools. Then there was the school closure debacle last year. Superintendent Brent Jones told me when he was leaving, that was part of the decision. Like all of that was just really difficult to navigate and to deal with all of that public blowback. Also, there was COVID, like I mentioned before. So there's just a lot of tough things, and it's just, yeah, it's a really tough job. You're a public figure trying to make changes in a system that doesn't always respond well to that or change quickly.
Yeah, I want to take those issues that you mentioned one by one. And the first one you mentioned was that massive budget deficit. How does Schuldiner plan to tackle it?
Yeah, so this year's budget deficit is about $87 million. Schuldner says he's already seeing some efficiencies he could make. And as he put it, he isn't looking to fire everybody. His words, not mine. Instead, he thinks there's some restructuring that could be done. He notes that the infrastructure is set up for, a much larger school system. Seattle Public Schools used to have a lot more students than it does now. So that'll be kind of part of the conversation, but it sounds like not, teacher layoffs. He also specifically mentioned wanting to look at increasing revenue. Specifically, he talked a lot about wanting to boost enrollment because, the more kids you have, the more funding you get. So that's a big piece of the puzzle.
And so I'm curious if he can't do that. He's talking about, well, the district used to be bigger, you know. When that question has come up, it's come up with the question of, do we shutter schools? Now, like you mentioned, that idea is not popular in Seattle. But do you think, I mean, did he say if he'll bring that idea back on the table when he's in charge?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't really give me a yes or no on this. He said he still needs to get settled into Seattle and kind of survey the scene before coming to any sort of conclusion on that. He did take issue with the language the district used around school closures, in that they focused on how it would save money. He said the conversations, regardless of whether that's true or not, there's been debate of whether using school buildings and not laying off staff really saves money. But he said overall, those conversations should have been more focused on, like, is this good for kids? Because that's what education is all about. So he just said, whatever conclusion he does come to later on that, he said he wants everyone to know he's doing it because he believes it's right for kids and families and not just to save money.
So public safety has also been a big issue in Seattle public schools, especially Garfield High School, right, where a student was shot and killed last year. The school board recently rejected a proposal to bring an armed police officer onto that campus for a 1-year trial. I think I remember that they, removed campus officers, armed police officers during the pandemic. In your conversation with Schuldiner, did he talk about school safety or say anything about how he plans to approach this issue?
Yeah, so again, he didn't really give a super clear answer on this one either. He said he wants to have conversations with the community and police chief Sean Barnes, who used to be a school resource officer. And he said there are a lot of other things the district could do to improve safety and security overall. So it sounded like he was kind of saying, we should try other things before we do that. He mentioned Lansing has invested in bullet resistant film on glass, like windows. They've also put in more cameras, fences. So I think the vibe I got was that he'd like to try other things first.
Yeah. So he is coming from a school district in Michigan that serves about 10,000 students. In Schuldiner's new role, he's going to be overseeing a student population of around 50,000. So 5 times the number, right? What did he say when you asked him about just making that leap?
Yeah, I mean, he again seems really excited and energized about it. And he's living in the Midwest currently. He really sounded like a Midwesterner, and I say this as a Midwesterner. Kind of, he defended Lansing a little bit. He's like, it might seem small and cute compared to Seattle, but for the Midwest, it is a pretty big city. He said it's urban, culturally diverse. So he was kind of saying, I don't think it's completely different, but he also said, more importantly, he just thinks he has a good record to show for his time there, and he's confident he could bring that here. Lansing's graduation and attendance rates have both gone up while he's been there over the last 4 years. The district saw its first enrollment increase in 30 years. We've talked already about his experience with the budget. Lansing is now fiscally solvent. So he said he kind of just wants to bring all of that stuff to Seattle, and he thinks he can do that and make some big changes for the better. He also pointed out he does have big city experience. He founded that school in New York City. He's worked with the New York City Board of Education, and that's the largest district in the nation, far larger than SBS. So he was pretty confident, that he could handle it and excited about it.
Okay, but you did talk about that, weirdness of coming in, part of the way through the year. And it doesn't sound like there is a set start date for Shuldiner yet, but that they're aiming for early, next year. Did he say anything about how he plans to make that handoff as painless as possible?
Yeah, so he said he met Fred Podesta, the current interim superintendent, and he really enjoyed chatting with him and was looking forward to working with him. Podesta's been the district's chief operating officer for 5 years before taking on this role. And so I think he'll go back to that. So Shuldiner will kind of have, the person who's been keeping things going at SPS for a while right by his side. So I think he feels pretty confident about that. And he just said that he's really not planning to make these huge drastic changes right off the bat. So he was confident about the transition being smooth.
Okay. So no drastic changes off the bat. I think I read in your story that he'll spend his first 100 days just like getting to know the community. But his long-term goal is, well, I'm just going to let him say it because it's pretty big.
And I think that all of our real goals is to create Seattle as the single greatest urban school district in America. That's the goal, nothing less.
So that's a big goal, Sami. Like, how does Shuldiner plan to achieve this?
Yeah, he's got a lot of ideas, a bit of a laundry list, you could say. He's mentioned achieving fiscal solvency, of course, but he also wants to boost enrollment, lower chronic absenteeism, increase the graduation rate, overall see academic improvements. So he's ready to roll up his sleeves and get going.
Okay, this is jumping topics a little. Well, I mean, it's staying on the school district, but I am our politics reporter, right? And we did just have an election on Tuesday, and I do kind of wonder if those school board elections, and again, the school board chooses the superintendent who leads the district, so it is a way for voters to say, I think, how they want the district to be run. Do you think that they are telling, is there anything that Ben Shuldiner, the potential next superintendent, should hear from voters when you look at these results, Sami?
Yeah, I think they're sending a message. I think voters are saying they want to see better financial oversight of the district for sure. Also, for sure, no school closures, just to name a couple of things. So, incumbent Joe Mizrahi and former school board member Vivian Song both had super strong showings in both the primary and once again in the general election. And both of them have expressed those views and were endorsed by big parent advocacy groups that got really big during those closure conversations. I would say the one wild card is the District 2 race between Sarah Clark and Kathleen Smith. Clark was appointed to the seat and was looking to retain it. And she's also kind of in the same slate as Song and Mizrahi in terms of wanting to increase fiscal oversight, being opposed to closures, and getting those endorsements from some of the big parent advocacy groups. Notably, she wasn't endorsed by the stranger, though. And it was interesting, on election day, former board member Lisa Rivera wrote an op-ed saying the stranger got it wrong. So it felt like kind of a last-ditch effort. So that race hasn't been called yet. And in the primary, that was a really tight race. So we'll see what happens there. I don't think the candidates are super different, but for sure, Sarah Clark was the candidate that those big parent advocacy groups wanted to see on the board. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes to be.
Yeah. And when it comes to be, you, the listener, can go to KUOW.org to see what Sami West has written about it, because Sami is our reporter covering the Seattle Public Schools' ongoing search for a new superintendent and just schools in general in Seattle. You can also read her conversation with Ben Shuldiner, Seattle Public Schools' new superintendent, at KUOW.org. Sami, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.